I'm Spike Jonze, and I'm here to interview the Coen brothers with their crew. And so the order of what today is going to be we're going to show some clips for the film pertaining to cinematography, and then bring Roger Deakins up with the Coen brothers, and then we'll do the same for the sound team and then the production design. So I was so thrilled when I saw this movie. I was just in awe of it, and I saw it maybe about a month ago at the ArcLight, and it was incredibly tense. I didn't really know what it was about, so I just went in blind, and was just it was like the tensest thriller I've seen in a long time, and it was just so masterfully done. I was not surprised. But just in terms of Roger's work, where do you guys start when you sit down with Roger? What is the first things you ask them, or the first conversation when it comes to a film like this?
It's a really good question that none of us can probably answer.
We don't talk much anymore.
It's true. Well, I guess I could say a couple of things. One is that we still storyboard our movies pretty much, the whole film before we start shooting. And we've done different, depending on how much time we've had with Roger ahead of time, there's been different sort of, at times Roger's been involved in that process from the beginning, and at times we bring him into the process after we've done one sort of rough draft of the boards ourselves. So it sort of starts, and I think, with us in a way, with after the most general sort of, discussion about what it is that we're doing with the storyboards.
When you read this script, what are the ideas you came away with after you finished the script, or what was your sort of?
Well, I'd read the book, and I knew they were writing a script, that Scott had asked them to write a script, and I think I was kind of pressing them to do it, direct it, because I just love the material I love Cormac McCarthy's material. But I think, just in terms of visually, so, I knew the material from that side, and then read the script, and then we'd have basic discussions. But it's much more, sort of organic process in the way that, as Joel said, they storyboard, and then we talk about them, and then it's a matter of going around searching for locations together, and you gradually talk about the scenes as you're looking at the locations, and they'll say, well, maybe this doesn't work because we want this feeling for the location, or, and it's just it's a process that just builds over that prep time, really.
Yeah, I also think it's a little bit different with big exterior movies than it is with interior movies that are largely shot interior. Like, I know the discussions we had about this were quite different from the ones we had about Oh Brother, just in terms of like when we would go around and look. On this one, it was all about why can't we shoot the whole movie at 5 p.m. And on Oh Brother, it was all about how do we get rid of all this green. And it was sort of, it comes down to sort of really specific things like that, So it was, you sort of proceed. I think we always proceed from a point of view of, actually the two things those movies have in common was an attempt to sort of mute the palette from the very beginning, which was very much sort of part of the discussion. We didn't want it to rain in Texas because we liked the color, that sort of brown ochre color of the vegetation. And in Oh Brother, we were sort of searching for a way to photograph the landscape so that they weren't as saturated.
So how do you do that? Was that mostly done digitally, or did you guys?
Well, Roger did a lot
Brother
of
was the digital. Yeah, we felt we couldn't do it in the lab, and the digital DI idea was just coming into its fulfillment, like. And Joel said, well, let's take the risk. So we did some tests, and the tests were really kind of difficult. But we said, well, we won't be going into post for another 6 months, so we basically took the risk on the tests that were sort of rudimentarily. They sort of worked pretty well, so we took the risk.
And is this done in DI too?
Yeah, this is done in DI. But I mean, there's very little done to this actually in the DI, most of it. We were lucky because in Marfa, Texas, and then in around Santa Fe and that in New Mexico. And we're lucky it didn't rain. Everybody was praying for rain, all the locals, but we were praying it would stay dry. It felt, a bit terrible, really, but it did stay dry, thank God, yeah.
And speaking of time of day, there's a sequence where he goes back to the shootout, and the other, the guys in the truck show up and chase him, which was done. Especially when I watched it the second time, just marveling at how that was done at magic hour in that sequence. That like that. I was just thinking more in terms of the difficulty of trying to get a sequence like that at that pre-dawn look. Was it?
Well, some was. I mean, this was a whole discussion we had. We first of all, we're looking at this location, this huge, vast space that they wanted to see everything at night, and then there was this sequence where it starts to get dawn, and then it ends up in the river early morning. And so, but again, because the guys have storyboarded it, you can kind of work out a sort of battle plan of how you're going to do it. And we discussed where the dawn should start. And I suggested, well, I could do a fake kind of dawn. So when Moss drew up in his truck on this little hill, which was on the location, and we chose it for that specific reason, I could do a fake dawn behind the truck. And then the real dawn was sort of coming up in the same direction. So we could segue in then to Moss running away and the bad guys coming down the hill. So, and then you've got this storyboard of all the shots, how the sequence is going to work. And, you add things and you mess around with it as you go along. But you've got this sort of, you work out this battle plan. In the evening, you'll do this shot facing west. And then in the morning, after a night shoot, doing the stuff that we could fake the dawn, you'll do something shooting the other way. So, because I was trying to get everything backlit to get sort of a contrast and a blackness to it. So, that's basically what we do. We work through everything, and it's such a great help that everything they're so clear about what they want, how they want to see it,
But that's true. That was shot over, I don't know how many days. The pieces of that were over many days.
Many days and many locations.
At dawn and at dusk, just getting a few shots at dawn and at dusk. To try and piece that together. And then a little bit of it in the river was done second unit.
At dawn or dusk too?
At dawn or dusk, yeah.
We bracketed things together. Like we had like 3 nights of shooting to do the night stuff, I think it was, at the drug bust. And then in the morning and the evening of the night shoot, we'd do pieces for the chase. And then we found this location to do where Sugar comes over the bridge and shoots the bird, which was on the river, where we wanted to do the chase with the dog. So again, we would do a dusk shot on the river, then we go and do a night shoot and come back and do a dawn shot. So it's you figure kind of a battle plan to get it, but it only works because they know exactly what they want and what shots they need to cut together to make it. Otherwise, it would just be a mess. You could have no way of keeping a continuity on such a long scene, as instead of with so many different locations, little bits,
But the other part that was interesting about that is it's true that preceding the sort of break of dawn, we were in a huge basin, and we did want to see. We told Roger we didn't want to see everything, but we didn't want it to. We still wanted it to look like night, and which is just one of the hardest contradictions you can ask for. But it seemed important to us that in order to make it spooky, that you had to be able to sort of see the configuration of the trucks when he goes back there at night. And that was really, I think, the problem we had in terms of what approach to take with that is how are you going to see all of that and still make it convincingly, the middle of the night before the sun has started to come up.
That was nerve-wracking for its own reasons. Roger lit it with these huge Musco lights that are used for sporting events on TV, so we only had a set number of days before the Musco lights would be carted off to go to a college football game.
Yeah, and then they turned up, and I had a few hours pre-lighting on the night before we were doing it. We'd shot all day, and I went off to do this pre-light for a couple of hours. And I'd worked out, the distances and all the specs on the lights. It was like 2,500 feet from where I wanted the light on the bluff to where I needed some exposure and all this. And it was all mapped out. I'd spent days, slogging around this location, working it out. I turned these lights on, and there was nothing. My meter didn't move, and I thought, God, dear. I was in a total kind of, you know, okay, well, that's it, I'll get on a plane. And it was only, we broke, the rigging guys and that broke for lunch, and I went up to the top to look at the Moscow lights and look at the location from the top, and the guy says, well, you really like these softeners, these lenses we put in, they really soften the light. They love them on NASCAR because otherwise it blinds the drivers. And they had these beaten reflectors in every damn one light, and I just, you know. So I spent all night taking them off, and I only really actually got to see the lights that I thought I was getting on the night of the shoot. So that was like a bit, you know, but it worked out all right.
It's somebody told me I was when I told my friend I was coming to do this week. They said that they told me they'd heard that you guys only shot 250,000 feet of film on this. And is that a rumor or is that true?
No, that's true.
Was it that much?
I don't think it was that much, actually.
That's insane because most films are probably, you know, I'd say the average film is, you know, 3 times or 4 times that nowadays, and so, you know, people are rolling second cameras and you know, just covering everything from every angle, and so I imagine that goes back to storyboarding. And but did you guys ever get into an edit room and find yourself not having coverage you wanted, or Roger?
Yeah.
Or, sorry.
Yeah, I will certainly, but I'm sure you'd find yourself confronting that if you shot 1,000,000 feet as well.
True.
And actually, a lot of that comes from you know, we cut ourselves, and at a certain point, man, you just like 1,000,000 feet of film. How can you review it and remember what you've reviewed? You know.
Yeah.
Hey.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, we do roll 2 cameras when we're doing, I guess the only time is when we're doing stunts or there's something like really critical in terms of the light, I guess, you know. But I think when we rolled 2 cameras on the Magic Hour stuff, it was actually trying to grab 2 different shots at the same time with 2 different operators.
That was Josh falling down, wasn't it? And the dog chasing him down the hill before the river.
Yeah.
But it was very little.
But I do remember, Roger, when we were shooting with another operator, at the same time at Magic Hour, you were on the radio saying, don't shoot yet, don't shoot yet, don't shoot yet. And then there comes a point where Roger is, shoot now! What are you waiting for?
How much? Looking at a film like this, which is so much exteriors, how much is waiting for weather and light and you know, before you roll?
It was a pretty tight schedule, wasn't it, really? I mean, there wasn't a lot of that. I mean, the sequence we've just been talking about, I mean, I would go back and do quite a lot of it again. But, I mean, because you have to go with the light that's available. So, you know, in the morning, the sky was usually clear, and in the evenings, there'd been kind of thunderstorms, and the evenings were cloudy. So, from my point of view, it didn't match at all. And the one shot where I tried to blend the fake dawn into the real dawn really bugs me every time I see it, because it was cloudy and my fake dawn's in front of the clouds, so that doesn't make sense to me at all. But, you know, so I want to do that again when we get a chance. But
Let's go.
Well, while we have Roger here, we'll open this up to some questions from the audience for a minute, if anyone has any questions. Yeah, with the hat.
Is there any major difference between between the book and what you actually did as far as the story and the line?
No, it's pretty close to the book. I mean, there are, you know, it was essentially, the adaptation was a job of editing, because you can't, you know, things that were lost from the book. But in certain, you know, certain things that we rewrote slightly or changed the sort of emphasis on a little bit. But no, it's not a huge digression from the book in any real respect.
One more question. Can you guys hear the questions that are being asked? No? Okay, we'll repeat them. In the back there, yes, sir?
Yeah, how specific are your storyboards? I'm sorry. How specific are your storyboards? Are they shot by shot, or are they generalized ideas? And are you guys also shooting video at the same time? And do you do any like on-set editing to get an idea of what it's looking like?
How specific how close to the storyboards are the shots, and do you edit on camera with the video tab? I mean, on set?
The storyboards are pretty they are specific shot by shot, but you know, we kind of sometimes just throw them out when we're on the set. I mean, especially simpler scenes, non-action scenes that don't have to be kind of choreographed.
Yeah, I think we like having them there, even though, to be quite honest, it's true that we don't look at them much once we start shooting the movie. If the blocking's different, or if just the three of us are talking about things when we get on a location, or even after we see rehearsal, what often happens is that Roger and Ethan and I just get together after we've seen what the actors do and go, well, here's what makes sense. I mean, you know, just based on what they've done in terms of how we're going to cover the scene. And there might not be any reference to the storyboards at all. But
also, yeah, and also like Roger was saying, it's all kind of, it's a little fluid and feedbacky. I mean, you know, we do storyboards sometimes before we've seen the location, sometimes after, and that like modifies how you think about staging things, the specific location, and right, what the actors do, and everything affects everything else.
I have one question. You guys all seem like very calm gentlemen, and our sets, they're not always calm, and sometimes there's stress, or me and my cinematographer sometimes get in arguments and take a couple hours to make up. But do you guys ever like, is there stress, arguments? Is there anything like that? Or are you guys as calm on set as you are here?
it approaches catatonia, actually.
Roger, anything to add to this?
No. Just one time when I first started working with the guys on Barton Fink, it was funny incident. We were just doing a shot of this, the brass ball of a bedstead falling off and running down the carpet. And I would set this shot up as I thought the storyboard, you know, I'd put it there on a sort of 32 or something. I didn't like lenses as wide as they always used before I came along. And Ethan would come in and say, I think you were saying, oh no, wider, 18, I'll put the 18 on. And Joel would come in and say, they never came in together. Joel would come in and say, no, I think it's got to be longer. What are you doing? That should be tighter on the ball with 50. And this went on for about, a few times till they actually got in sync and got on the set at the same time. I just let it happen. I thought it was really interesting. But it was about the only time, I remember they actually had a different version, otherwise it's like you could talk to, you could swap between who you talk to get the information.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. One other question while we're here is, I heard Fargo, this might be a rumor too, Fargo was all shot on one lens, a 27 millimeter, is that true?
No, it was mostly shot on a 35. I don't know where. No, because we decided it wanted to be more observational and we weren't going to move the camera, so we decided to shoot it on like 40 or 35. But the first shot we did, I remember, was on a 32 mm and it was a 150-foot tracking shot. But at least we kept to the idea vaguely,
And what about this? Is this film mostly a set of lenses, or?
It's usually the case that we end up. That's an interesting thing about how you start out on a movie, I think, is you find yourself gravitating towards one lens or one sort of general family area, focal length, that you kind of discover is right for much of what you're doing. Of course, there's always, there are exceptions all over the place, but that does tend to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think this was mostly like a 32 and a 27, really, yeah.
Well, I'm getting the sign to cut it, but I would love to stay here and talk all day. But thank you, Roger. Nice to meet you. Thank you, Skip is the sound editor and mixer and the boss of the team. And Craig.
Thank you.
Craig's the sound designer and mixes also, and Greg's the mixer, and Peter is the production on set sound. And Peter, you've worked with these guys since their first film. Have you worked on all their films?
Since Blood Simple, well, with a couple of exceptions, the French movie and some other small moments here and there.
Wow.
The Armani commercials.
And it seems like you guys have worked on many of their films. Skip.
Skip has.
All of them,
All of them.
right?
Yep.
And so one of the things I noticed, especially in this film of theirs, which is there's so many sequences that are sound and picture driven without dialogue, is the tone. Like when you see it in a theater, and even in with just showing clips, where the movie gets laughs. You don't know when they're going to come. And I guess there's a question for the Coens as well as you guys. Are you guys aware of where the laughs are going to come, or is it different in every screening? And is it and how does sound? It seems like sometimes, just like the unscrewing of the light bulb sound gets a laugh, or like these small little details can get a laugh in a film like this. Which is that something you guys are aware of, or?
It's really interesting. It's not really, and especially not in a movie like this. And it just reveals itself once the movie is finished. And since we didn't know, there wasn't any sort of conscious compensation in terms of sound design or levels or any of the rest of it, because we didn't know. And yeah, it is different, I guess. Don't you think it's a little different from audience to audience, although certain places are sort of consistent?
It's a little different. The light bulb thing, I think that just gets a laugh just because it's the right sound, right?
I think maybe the audience is looking for an out there too, so they're happy
A laugh
to grab.
track would have been a good guide, though, to keep
Laugh
the audience
track.
consistent.
Actually, the DVD is coming out with a laugh track. But the sounds that we and Skip always think are funny never really get a laugh, like the hubcaps Skip always puts in, the sound of the hubcap spinning on the ground, diminishing wobbles.
Or, it's also true that we often say to Skip, we'll say literally, we need some funny sounds here.
In this movie, were there any specific things that,
Aside from the light bulb?
aside from that part where
I think the car crash was a funny sound for us at the end of the movie. We laughed every time it happened.
There's a really funny sound when Josh, hijacks a truck. The guy gets shot. He kind of veers around a corner and smashes into a parked car, and there's a great gong effect at the end, which always makes me chuckle, but never seems to work for an audience.
And has the gong effect gotten a laugh with audiences?
No.
But so when you guys sit down and first, I guess, watch a cut at some point in the process, how early are you guys brought on, and what are the conversations like, or is it similar to how they were describing conversation with Roger Deakins, which sound like there's very little to none?
Basically, I read the script usually around the time they start shooting, and then I always try to go to the set, even though I hate going to the set. I always try to go there just to try to tease them about something. And we usually talk about sports or food. And then during the editing process, they start asking us for material. And Craig and I start making sounds and reviewing the sounds. Sometimes we review the sounds as they're shooting that Peter's recorded to make sure that everything's going to be good and to figure out how much ADR dialogue replacement will be required down the road. But we basically don't get on board until they start cutting, and we don't really start working until the director's cut is due. And then we basically, from that point until the film is finished, we get to a really nice trial and error period where we get to make material and give it to them. They put it in the cut as they're working on cutting the picture. And then we can sort of figure out what things are working and what things are not. And hopefully by the time we get to the mixing process, we've figured out all the big questions. And of course, the sound effects that we've given them help them get the cut to work properly as well.
Peter, are you on set? Obviously, you're doing dialogue. Are you also looking for other things to give Skip and the team in terms of ambience or specific sounds of doors and floors and?
Well, I try to get all the things that I know will be hard to recreate afterwards, little bits and pieces. If there's period vehicles, I try to get that stuff. But as they were discussing with Roger, when you're shooting the entire day's work in the 5 minutes between 5 and 5:05, sometimes there isn't the chance to say, well, wait a second, we would like to get another door slam. Yeah. But we try to get as much as we can. We always try to record a version of a voiceover if there is one, and then later on they can determine whether that is what they want to use or something else.
And in fact, that is, we did use the voiceovers that we recorded on the set with Peter in the final movie. We didn't end up replacing any of that.
It's actually usually kind of better because, the actors are kind of thinking about the part then as opposed to 8 months later.
Yeah. So going back to tone and like when you guys are sitting down first brainstorming about what the movie's going to sound like, what were the sort of philosophies of what you wanted it to feel like or sound like and for this film?
Well, we have, since we've worked together on so many movies, the spotting sessions that we have tend to be very specific about very specific sounds that they want to work for the cut and for the movie. And then there's a lot of referring to other things that we've done. And then I take all that information back to my computer and type up a list of scene-by-scene description of what we talked about. And I try to regurgitate the reference material into actually something that Craig can understand. And then Craig and I get together, as we just did up in San Francisco, and we go over the list of all the requirements for the movie and all the sounds. And he, of course, already knows what to do 99% of the time. And it comes down to explaining the very, very specific things that they've told me. And then Craig will go about the process of compiling recordings, both making recordings and also of stuff that we already have recorded for other movies. And he'll start making sounds to deliver to them to put in the cut, as we talked about. And then we're on our way.
Yeah, I think the first thing we worked on was the air gun, perhaps, and the silent shotgun sounds to put in the cut. I think that's the first thing I remember.
Yeah, those were really specific sounds. Those were ones that we basically said to these guys, we don't know what this is supposed to sound like exactly, but we wanted them to, basically go off and try different things and then that we could put up against the picture and see if they seemed right, because it was this strange, really strange contradiction that we wanted, which was something that was impactful and startling, but was supposed to be coming from a silencer, So we talked a lot about the sound itself, and then we talked a lot about what the sound could do in the room in terms of reverberation or just the concussion of the, thing. But that was, you're right, that was a big thing.
Yeah, and also, for me anyway, another big thing was the non-use of music throughout the film. Normally, I'm working away on the film, and I know that at the end, there's going to be music added, so whatever I'm doing is not going to be what we hear. Whereas in this film, the stuff that we did at the beginning when we started working is what you hear. And so we could really refine that, and the detail and everything was all there. I knew exactly what we were doing and what it was going to sound like. I didn't have to wait until 2 weeks before we start our mix, and there's music all through here. All that wind we did? Forget it. Cut.
Where I work with Carter Burwell and whose work I love, especially from these guys' work but he did. There's supposedly 20 minutes of music in this film somewhere. Is that true?
No, we said to Carter we wanted him to write.
Agent, I think.
There's virtually no music in it. We wanted him to write a piece for the end credits, which was an unusual assignment, when there's no preceding music. But actually, what Carter did do in the movie, and what he has done with Skip on other occasions, but it was much less in this movie, is he did some tonal things that are almost like sound effects in the same key as keying off of sound effects that these guys were doing, which are very subliminally under certain scenes, and they're not really music. They're like notes or bending notes that are just sustained and are mixed very, very low. And it's, I think, only 5 times briefly in the movie, aside from the, so I don't know if you'd call it music. It was funny, after we screened the finished basically finished and mixed version of the movie for the studio. Some department asked for a cassette of the music for the album.
And so, Greg, when it shows up on your desk, I guess you're the sort of the fresh ears at the end of the road. And on a film like this, what did you first hear? What was your sort of?
Well, it was pretty together before it even got to me. But the thing that I noticed is, again, with the lack of music, just how much you could really hear the nuance and the detail in in sound effects and wind and ambiance. And sometimes it's not so much what you hear, but what you don't hear. And the Coen brothers have a great ear for that. In fact, I think a lot of the time they were just getting us to kind of pull back on stuff and getting it to a quieter point, especially in the last scene that we saw. I thought it was very effective too. So.
I guess we'll take some questions from the audience. Yes, in the front here.
Yeah, I have a question in that first clip where it's windy, comes up on the phone, and it's sound on the way down into the cowboy boots in the dirt, and the sound of leather moving. Those are sounds that I really associate with classic westerns, and I was wondering, were those sound changes environmentally driven, where it's just windy up in the hill and it's quiet down there, where you're trying to link kind of the Mexican standoff idea with the walking and the measured kind of depth?
So she's asking you, were they intentionally referencing Western sounds in the desert with the boots?
Well, as far as the feel of, for me, it was going more for the atmosphere vibe. When he's up on the top of the hill and you have a wind going and you cut and it's quiet and you just hear the boots. I wasn't particularly going for the Western kind of feel, but it was definitely, and it happens in other places in that sequence where the atmosphere shifts. It's still the same kind of place, but it feels different. It feels different in time, or it shakes you a little bit, I
think it almost feels like score in a way, the way that it changes.
Yeah, and you're kind of on edge, puts you on edge. You don't know what's gonna happen. There's nothing to tell you what's gonna happen coming up. There's no music to lead you on. That was more the intent of that kind of thing, where it would just build up and cut off, and then or start in a scene quiet and build up through the scene.
As a viewer, you never know where the movie's going. It's a movie that you have no idea what's going to happen. Especially because it's sort of, there's two movies going on. There's the sort of unstoppable killer, and then there's the more existential, the unstoppable existential. I don't know. Joel, you could probably explain what the movie's about.
No, I couldn't, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Ethan, can you?
We work with what we're given. Scott Rudin gave it to us. Maybe he can explain it to us.
Scott. In the front.
In terms of the wind itself, was it a factor in trying to get on-set sound? I mean, when you're on that open plain, there's got to be a lot of wind.
It was a huge factor, and it's also, the complication was it was also incredibly variable. So sometimes there'd be this nice wind going underneath, which we'd find a way to deal with, and then sometimes there'd be no wind at all. And so I'm sure that some of the wind that was put in helped to smooth over the differences between, the different wind speeds. But yeah, it was a factor, not just for sound, but for work. Because big gusts of wind would come up, and there's a great scene in the very beginning where he's running, where you see thunder and lightning in the background, and it's not a digital effect. That when the storms were there, we were just at the subject to the weather all the time.
Okay. Yeah.
This is not really related to sound, but I have a question as to why didn't, when he was in the hotel room, why didn't he use the train lock if he was, is that a macho thing, or what?
This is a question that's been bugging her. Why didn't he use the chain lock in the hotel?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Peter, do you know?
Would have done that totally differently.
Yes, sir.
It seems like you pay a lot of attention to the pacing of the film, and I was wondering, was this something that you were actually trying to achieve, as you were filming it, or was it more in the editing process that came about?
Was the pacing something intentional when you guys were going in?
I think it's more in the editing, but I have to say that it's one of the things that this sort of system that we used on the last movie, where all these guys were giving us material to use while we were cutting the movie, really helps you refine that process of, as finding and establishing and maintaining the sort of pace that you want and knowing how far you can push the scene in terms of tension. And
it's really true, even in terms of like the backgrounds that Craig was talking about, winds, that cut out or cut in to give you a sense of time cut or location cut, all this and specific background sounds and specific effects are like, timekeeping things. I mean, that's like becomes part of how you think about the movie, especially this movie.
I also thought about it, like there's a couple of times where Sugar off camera is doing something, like there's a scene where he shoots the lock out of a door, puts down his canister off camera, and doing the sound effect, I was just like, well, the pacing of this movie is such that he would just clunk, clunk, put it down. It wouldn't be a hurried action of a guy who's going in to kill somebody. It would be his action, and the whole movie just leads you to that when you're working on it as well. Even on the simple off-camera sound, it was clunk, clunk, and then he walks in the door.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's very different from the way we used to, well, the opportunities there in terms of using sound is very different. It's
very rare.
And also, but it's also the tools that we have now to be able to sort of integrate it are so much easier now than they used to be when we were cutting on film. And it definitely affects picture editing, I think, especially in a movie like this, in a positive way.
Yeah, the sound is a huge character in the movie, and the time it's given off camera or on camera is, I would imagine has to be because you were getting the elements as you were cutting, and is there, let's go in the back because we haven't, the red hat there.
You've already touched on the subject a little bit, but I just wonder for the Coens, at what point did you make the decision to not really use a score for this film? And seeing as how they're so prevalent in some of your other films, where did that process start, and where was the final decision made?
So at what point did you guys decide not to use a score in this film?
I think it was the first time we screened it for ourselves, Skip. These guys did a mix for ourselves just to look at it cut, and without music, it just seemed to play well.
Yeah, actually, Ethan's intuition about it was even preceded that. It was when we were first starting to put the movie together, and he said maybe this movie doesn't want to have any music, but I think what we did was we sort of made the final decision not to after, as Ethan was saying, after we screened it the first time, and we went, okay, because that kind of is it seems sort of like an up and down thing. You look at a scene and you go, it either seems to need music or it doesn't, and it's not usually a lot of gray area,
There's the big musical number in this movie, like all the, and I was sort of hoping it would do for Norteño music what, Oh Brother did for Roots music. I guess that hasn't totally come about yet.
Yeah, it didn't happen. We were hoping for the best song nomination.
Who? I don't know this reference. What is it, Norteña?
It's the essentially it's like a mariachi band that's playing in the square, but it's a certain kind of mariachi. It's from northern Mexico. But yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious about the dogs. There's species of dogs. I'm wondering, it's not to do something, but is it a symbol of something? Is it
The prevalence of dogs. What does it mean?
I don't know if it means anything. They're scary, and it's a chase scene. It's a scary dog. But Cormac McCarthy loves dogs. I mean, almost all his books have dogs in them. I think we added that dog to the chase scene, didn't we?
Yeah, the dog is not in that part of the novel, but it's true that in many of his novels, he has a lot of animal imagery in the novels, and specifically dogs. So it didn't seem inappropriate to sort of put it there at that point.
Okay, well, I'm getting this signed. But thank you guys very much. It was a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Jess, this is your first movie with these guys. Now, I'm going to assume your first conversation about the script was longer than than the other guys, and now we can finally get some answers.
I don't know if you could assume that.
What was the first meeting you had with these guys? And what did you ask them, or what did they ask you? What was the discussions?
Well, the first actual meeting we had was an interview because it was my first job, and I was on a job that went down, and they had heard it, and then Ethan had called me up and said, "Can you meet, in like 6 hours at the Cedar Tavern on University?" And so we all, met there where we live in New York, and sat down and talked about what the movie could be, and and it was an interview. So that was my first meeting with them.
Was it intimidating?
Was it what?
Intimidating.
No, not really.
Did you guys know these guys? I mean, did you know them before? No.
Yeah, no, I mean, not personally. I know their work, but it was look at it wasn't intimidating. It was
And what was and what were the discussions about the project, or what were they looking for production design wise?
I mean, there was a lot of things that were very descriptive in the book that we knew we had to do. All the picture cars, the murder weapons. So it was just a matter of going out and finding these, great locations that could tell us story of West Texas, and we actually shot it mainly in New Mexico. So they had done some scouting before I'd even gotten on, and had some ideas of where it might go and how we might get it done, and then we just collaborated on that. And I kept bringing in research, stopping by their office and say, what about this? And then they would respond to it, or through email, and just arrived at what that look of 1980 could be in West Texas, and what are the colors of it, and what is the palette, and are we going to stick to it? So that was all the conversations that we had, and then they kind of left me alone for a while, and I went to New Mexico and found a lot of locations and generated models so we can look at it and examine the whole thing, and it was just sort of like a process like that.
And Ethan, the color palette seemed to be funny to you. Was there anything specific?
Just because Jess is a palette Nazi.
I really am.
What was your?
He determined, and a lot of this is actually, as Jess is suggesting, as Roger suggested earlier, through scouting. Determining what the movie's going to look like is something we kind of discover together, largely through scouting, and just kind of arrived at where he thought the movie should kind of sit in terms of color, and had cards made up that showed the palette and distributed them to everybody. And we would occasionally try to sneak some hot pink or something onto the set to see if he was awake, and he always was.
And it ended up actually the movie ends up being pretty much exactly what that palette was, that original sort of, reference that you made. But it's also true that the other thing that he brought in a lot of was, a lot of photographs, research photographs in terms of not just, I think it wasn't just from the point of view of period research, but also just in terms of sort of feeling, in terms of the design. So, kind of like, well, this photograph is kind of what the idea that we're going at.
Which photograph?
Well, no, I mean, he brought in lots and lots of stuff, and then we would kind of look at lots of stuff and edit through it, and,
Just in general, for going through photography books that I love and photographers that I like, I mean, I Xerox it off and, bring it in and say, what about this? And that just stems a conversation. What about...
Which photographers?
Eggleston, there was a lot of that in there. And just what about, the rhythm of this, shot, this photograph? Will it work for this scene, So there was a lot of that. But we do discover, we discovered most of the movie out, scouting around. And it was a process of elimination. And what could we do? What could we afford to do? How are we going to do it? And So that that was the main. That's how we got into the design process. That's how we got it executed.
And like in looking for a location for the shootout, which is a big location, what were you looking for, or what did you want it to feel like? And because that's something you can't really build or affect with art direction, so you've got to find.
You mean when he's running around in the town and then he gets in the
Oh no,
the
I was
truck
thinking
or
about the sort of where the drug deal went wrong.
Oh, the basin where the cars are
Yeah.
or the trucks are. That was one of the few big exterior locations. In fact, maybe the only big exterior location that we did that was not in West Texas. That was actually in New Mexico. Pretty much, or most of the other big stuff that's exterior we shot in West Texas. And I don't know who found that originally. Jess found a lot of those places initially, looking around for places that.
Yeah, well, that was one, we had to match that for Marfa, Texas, where we shot for 4 or 5 days at the beginning. So that was a big concern of mine and of everybody's, how we're going to match the terrain. And it is, we did get lucky because it didn't rain and it did stay brown, which was what we needed for the movie. But we chose that, I don't know, we stumbled upon that location, I think, from the top, and it was this great, giant, big basin. And we got down inside of it and said, yeah, this is where it could be. And then just figured out the rest. And there was a lot of, some people think you go in and just shoot, turn the cameras on and everything. But that was one of my biggest sets, I think, just figuring out, taking shrubs out and replanting them and just configuring the whole thing and finding those old Broncos and making them look new. And getting them in there without disturbing the terrain and, just mapping the whole thing out. And again, it goes back to the storyboards. It was just, you could just, those are the instructions and we stuck by them and it worked out.
And what were some of there's some great props in here that like what were some of your favorite props, or which props did you keep at the end of the movie?
Well, the cattle gun was obviously the best. And that, I don't have that at home. Scott, I promise you, I don't have that at home. But that was, I found, they don't actually, those things are charged by a CO2 cartridge. So I found a farmer in New Mexico, maybe about 10 miles outside of Santa Fe, who had one of those cattle guns. And he loaned it to us. And we measured it, and we checked it all out. And we figured out with the effects guys, how could we hook a tank up there? And they built, one that would actually work through the CO2 tank. So that is the prop on the movie. So that was definitely my favorite.
And did you guys keep it?
No, we talked about giving it to Cormac at the end of the show, and I don't know what happened to it.
Do you? No, I don't. All I know is when we were looking at the research of, for this and in building it, it was one of those, as a sort of product of adaptation, it was one of those things that I kept thinking to myself, I'm really glad that I'm not the one who thought this thing up.
It all looks like it's on location, but is there any things that you guys had to build in terms of the hotels or the houses or anything?
We built a lot. We built the interiors of the motels. We used the exterior of a lot of motels and then built the insides. We built that cabin, which you just saw. We built the bridge crossing. We didn't build the bridge, but we put all the elements there. It was an exit ramp in Las Vegas, New Mexico, that we took over for a couple of months and put all the elements in there and created that border crossing.
Wow.
This border crossing was so convincing. This is the middle of New Mexico, hundreds and hundreds of miles from the Mexican border. There was a 7-Eleven nearby. A woman stopped in, very upset and screaming at the proprietor, I'm on parole. I can't go over into Mexico.
Wow, good job, Jess. That's good. No, I would have just assumed you had shot it on location. That's amazing.
Yeah, that was the big one. We'd looked for that. It was the obvious place to do it. We found it because we were shooting a lot more in that small town of Las Vegas, and that was just a matter of figuring out I did a little rendering of it, and I think everybody fell in love with it. And I was like, wow, how am I going to do this? With the money that we had and just getting the whole thing done. But it really worked out. So that was a set. We built the Stephen Root's office, that Texas high rise. That was a set. Basically, all the motel rooms in the show were sets that we just shot the exteriors of on location.
Wow. And the second hotel with the big shootout is all set too?
At the end? Or
Josh is shooting through the
door.
door.
Yes, yeah, the Eagle hotels. Yeah, those were sets.
Oh.
The trailer, we found a gutted trailer, Josh's trailer. That was a set which we stuck at a trailer park. So there was a lot that went into it.
I got to imagine that, like, just from a viewer, it's a film that gets. You think it just feels so natural and so complete that the production design is sort of almost is invisible. So you've done your job so well, you've made yourself invisible, which is a credit to you.
Well, thank you.
And with the trailer, was there any, because I haven't seen Raising Arizona in a couple of years, but it looked like the exact same layout as Raising Arizona, like where the door was, where the kitchen was, where the bedroom was.
Wait a minute.
What's that? What's that?
I said, wait a minute.
That's my layout.
I can't remember. Was it? It was. I remember that the trailer in Raising Arizona. This we were shooting. This was essentially a set that Jess made, but in the shell of a real trailer. And the trailer that we made on Raising Arizona was an exaggeratedly large set on a soundstage. So the proportions of it were different, although the layouts, they tend to be really similar in those things anyway, I mean, there's not a whole lot of
So I'm overreaching for some sort of 20 years later reference? Or,
no, I don't think of it that consciously, no.
And so was there sound stages down there that you built the hotels on, or?
Yeah, there's a sound stage at the College of Santa Fe. I mean, nothing like Hollywood style, but two decent stages that we're able to just rotate all the sets in and out. We'd shoot for a while, then go back out, go back in, and so it worked out.
And so just my last question: when you guys interviewed him, what was it about Jess that you said, okay, this is our guy, and this is?
They were sick of interviewing everybody else. They were exhausted.
We'd seen Capote, and it was. I mean, I do remember that one initial early discussion that we had with Jess, and that we were really confident in him because of the work that we'd seen before. Was that it's a period movie, and there was a discussion about, even though it's set in 1980, how much you're going to sort of push that, how much you want to make the audience aware of it. You have to. There's a lot built into the material and the location. The fact that 25 years later in West Texas, it doesn't look that much different anyway. Even the cars are pretty much the same. But we did want elements that reminded you of the fact that it was a period movie. But we wanted it to be done with a really sort of light touch. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think we talked about early on. But we're really confident that Jess could find the right sort of level for that.
Yeah, say it, but don't overdo it, I think is what it was.
Yeah, both of those films seem very understated and meticulous. And so is that your intentional style?
Maybe that's what it's becoming, I don't know.
Well, let's see, questions for Jess. Yes.
In the final scene of the movie, I found items on that table as heavy as the dialogue. I was wondering if there was thought behind that, or am I just insane?
The items on the table in the final scene.
Yeah, behind where he's giving the speech, there's like a ceramic clown.
You have to talk to Nancy Haig about that and decorator. But no, you mean in Tommy Lee's kitchen? Yeah. No, there was no great significance. No, I think it might have been what they had in the house. That was like one of the last things we shot. But no, it didn't mean much.
I do remember a silver coffee urn that we kept seeing ourselves in the camera in on the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, with this film, you know, in your progression of filmmaking, your vision, was there something specific that you set out to do differently with this film? Like you said, you know, this time we're gonna, you know, was there something specific in terms of your vision that you set out to do differently with this, like a goal or an expectation that you had specific to this film? Like better coffee, or?
Different. So this film, was this anything? This had, it had been a couple of years since your last film, and in those couple of years, you guys.
Well, I'm not quite sure. You know, if you're asking if we in some way related them to our other movies, no, we never do. I mean, it's from a novel, you know, a novel by a great novelist. We were just, you know, trying to do the story justice, the story that had been given to us.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the one thing I was particularly impressed with, like in the big shootout scene, but I wanted to know, a lot of the weathering or some of the dustiness, like in the Eagle Hotel and so on. Once you've done your large big picture, how much do you return to a set, or how do you keep control of some of those fine details that the DP may bring out, like the way light falls across a wall, and there's like this feeling of, to me, dustiness, or any of that. Do you really do you care that much about the final control of how a scene looks, and how do you check on that?
Oh yeah, I care a great deal. I mean, that's what it's all about. I mean, you know, it's a. Oh, me myself, no. There's like, I'm usually I mean, the great thing about working with these guys is they're so creative in everything that they do, all aspects of the movie. It allows me to go on and get on to the next thing and get it ready and make it great. So, but there's people there that you know, just make sure that it's still dusty or still crinkled or still torn and whatever. So I usually get it to a point where I love it, and then, you know, somebody maintains it. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because it just seemed to me like the detail, and there was like a breadth of that dust and decay that was really a part of the atmosphere of the scene, and that's like with the sound design too. Like that thing when he opens the door and the keys are still swinging in the ignition, making that noise. It just adds so much life and atmosphere to it that especially when there's no music score to go along with it or anything else, it becomes the characterization. So.
Well, the keys was a specific, I don't know, strike us as a specific sound opportunity. But I think a big part of what you're talking about is what Spike was talking about in terms of Jess's unobtrusiveness. When you build a lot of stuff for a movie, a big part of what you have to do is build it and then age it so it doesn't look built. I mean, that's just a huge part of what, and those textures are a huge part of what preoccupy him.
Yeah, a big part of it for me is like when in the big shootout scene, you pop that door open with all those perforations and everything. But it's like, and I guess that's part of your standby painter crew or whatever it is, where you dust that stuff down where it's so convincing.
Yeah, I mean, after each take, it requires some sort of a reset, and there's people there that take care of that to make it, you know, like as good or as great as it was before anything happened.
Yeah.
This has been tremendous. Thank you so much. You guys may be catatonic, but it seems like you just hire geniuses. Everybody seems like a genius up there. So there's some real method in your madness. I just wanted to say, it seems to me the preparation, the primary preparation that you do with the writing and the storyboard seems to be essential to let these brilliant people do their work.
Well, you know, we come from very low budget filmmaking originally, and that kind of storyboarding was I think originally the motivation, and to a certain extent it still is, was to sort of be able to maximize your resources by saying to someone like Jess, well, we need these two walls, but we don't need that wall, you know, so you can make it work with the budget that you have, and it's just a habit that we've carried with us, even on movies where maybe we have a little bit more flexibility. Jess, I have to say, has always, you know, on this movie gave us, even within the sort of, and this wasn't a hugely expensive movie, but gave us always options and the ability to change our mind, and a lot of flexibility on the sets that he built, even within some of the constraints that we sort of asked him for, just because we wanted to, we just didn't have that much money. But
what you're talking about certainly isn't unique to us. I mean, Joel mentioned Capote, this movie Jess had done, which is a really cheap movie and a really beautiful movie. I mean, anybody, it's just the nature of making movies. Anybody who's doing a very kind of complicated thing, it can't kind of appear the day you show up to shoot. I mean, it's just the nature of making movies. You got to think about all this stuff a long time in advance, especially if you don't have a lot of money to work with. But in any event, that's kind of what anyone doing this has to do.
Yeah, I'm getting the time to wrap it up, so thank you guys very much for coming.